Without any further ado, we will call to order the Planning Commission meeting for the town of Truckee for November 15th, 2020. Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Riley? Here. Commissioner Freeman?
Here.
And Chair Gove.
Here.
We will note that Vice Chair Tarnay is absent this evening.
All right. Now, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Alrighty, now at this point in time, I'd like to open public comment. This public comment period is for members of the public to come up and address anything that they want to talk about at all, except for what is on the agenda for tonight. You'll be limited to 3 minutes. We ask that you state your name and then prattle on for 3 minutes. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Okay, we'll move into the approval of minutes for the September 2022 regular meeting. And I was absent from that, so would either one of my fellow planning commissioners like to make a motion to approve, deny, or modify the minutes for that meeting?
You probably can't make a motion on that particular item since you won't have a quorum.
Okay, well, and then
So we can postpone that to
we're going to
next month.
postpone the meeting minutes again, which is what we do every meeting, it feels like, lately. Wah, wah, wah.
You can move on to your October 18th meeting minutes unless one of you wasn't there for that evening as well.
Okay, fair enough. Commissioner Freeman was absent at that meeting.
Okay, I tried.
Okay, we'll go ahead and give this a shot next month, December 20th, I believe. Well, one of these days we'll get these minutes approved. It might be next year. Okay, so we'll move on. All right, agenda item 6.1 to request to continue to into 6.1 is a minor public review request to continue the Martis Valley Quarry 2-year review, 10701 Soaring Way. Do we have anything to add to that, staff, or are we just going to go ahead and move that to the December 20th meeting?
That's correct. We don't have anything additional.
Okay, so that will be moved to December 20th here at Town Hall at 5 p.m. Moving on to item 7.1, application 2022-6, Jorga Ranch Phase 2, and we have Laura with a staff presentation.
Chair Gove, in looking
Yes.
at the cheat sheet for this evening, I
Yeah.
think we may want to actually step back to item 6.1 and open public comment for anyone who might be here this evening that
yes.
didn't receive the request to continue.
Oh, that is an excellent point. Okay, thank you very much, Jenna. We will go ahead and move into public comment for item 6.1, which is the request to continue the Martis Valley Quarry 2-year review. If you want to make a public comment on that, please step up to the podium, state your name, and make your case for 3 minutes. Seeing none, let's close public comment. Thank you very much.
Chair, go. I was thinking maybe we could take a 5-minute break just to give IT some time so you guys can.
Is that going to be enough time?
Possibly.
Possibly, or you want to do?
Why don't
10?
we take a 10-minute
10-minute break.
recess, and then that way the people at home don't have to continue to watch this. And
Yep.
yeah, okay. So it is 5:16. We'll recess till 5:26. No audio. Can everybody hear me through the speakers? Okay. All right. Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks everybody for your patience. We appreciate that. It looks like IT's gotten us through our little challenges here, so we'll get this meeting back underway and move into the staff presentation with Laura. Go ahead, Laura.
Good evening, Commission. We're here tonight to talk about the Jorger Ranch Parcel 2 project. Here's the project location. You can see it's across the street from the Rayleighs, and then these two parcels here are the next two phases of the Soaring Ranch project. This is just an overview of the project site and existing conditions photo. The zoning is manufacturing industrial, and the parcel size is 4.88 acres. The staff report included a list of potential questions that the Commission could consider discussing tonight as part of its review. The first is whether the project is consistent with the 2021 Jorger Ranch Specific Plan, the 2025 General Plan, and the December 14th, 2021 Development Code. Those are the documents that were in effect at the time the project was deemed complete for processing. Next is whether the proposed mix of uses is appropriate for a project within the M1 zoning district, and whether all potential compatibility issues have been addressed through the conditions of approval. And the third is whether there are any modifications to the site design or building architecture that would be required to achieve consistency with a specific plan and development code standards. Some background on the project. The site is located within the Jorger Ranch Specific Plan area. It's the M1 piece here. As you can see, the other M1 portion of the specific plan area is over here, the triangle where the Truckee Tahoe lumber project is, and the CR zone directly across the street is the Soaring Ranch project. Since the specific plan was adopted in 2015, we've had 4 projects approved. Soaring Ranch was approved in March 2018. That was a 3-phase development across the street from this project. The Truckee Tahoe lumber was also approved in March 2018. Soaring Ranch Phase 2 is approved in February 2021. That was a mixed-use project with commercial floor area and multifamily. And then the Phase 3 project was approved last month by the Commission. That was also a mixed-use project that had retail floor area and multifamily residential. The current specific plan is the version that was amended in June 2021. The purpose of those amendments was to update the housing requirements and address some inconsistencies that were in the original plan. As I mentioned, since the project was deemed complete for processing in March 2022, the 3 documents that I mentioned earlier are the ones that are in effect to govern this project review. The proposed project is a mixed-use development. It has just under 50,000 square feet of industrial floor area with 5 manufacturing shell buildings and 16,000 square feet of residential floor area. That includes 8 workforce housing units that are in 2 fourplex buildings and 4 market rate units in 2 duplex buildings, along with about 900 square feet of accessory office space. The applicant is requesting approval of a tentative map to subdivide the property, and that would create 37 industrial lots and 12 multifamily lots. And they're also requesting some phasing for the final maps to record up to 3 maps. The land use approvals that are required for the project are a development permit. That's based on the amount of floor area, site disturbance, and number of multifamily residential units. A tentative map to subdivide the property, and a zoning clearance for permitted uses in the M1 zoning district. Here is the site plan for the project. We'll go through these kind of quickly. We can come back to any of them as needed. Here's some elevations of the industrial buildings and the residential buildings, and the proposed materials for the project, and the landscape plan that's been prepared. So the first topic that was addressed in the staff report was specific plan consistency. The project is in the regional economic cluster in the specific plan, which was groupings of related businesses, suppliers, and associated lands within a set area. The manufacturing zoning district was designed to fulfill the vision of that cluster and attract new manufacturing and industrial businesses, as well as providing opportunities for existing businesses on the Truckee River to relocate. The primary goal is to provide economic diversification and land use opportunities to strengthen the economic base in Truckee. One of the unique aspects of the specific plan is targeted land uses. Those are the ones that were identified in the economic study with the specific plan as being preferred in terms of diversifying our economy and capturing industry growth dollars. So within the M zone, it was intended that there could be space for a number of manufacturing and industrial uses, potentially to relocate some uses from the river and parts of downtown that had been deemed suitable for redevelopment. Those include, as targeted uses, manufacturing and warehousing, auto recreational vehicle repair and maintenance, relocating and operating new manufacturing, warehousing, and processing, and those types of uses. Each of the zone districts also has a number of permitted and conditionally allowed uses in addition to the targeted uses. Permitted uses are those that have already been determined to be appropriate in the M1 zone and can be approved at the staff level through a zoning clearance. Conditionally allowed uses could potentially be desirable in an applicable zoning district and compatible with the adjacent uses, but review is required to make sure that its effects on the site and surroundings have been looked at. So within the M1 zoning district, there's a total of 14 uses that have been identified as permitted. Additionally, multifamily housing in a commercial and industrial project is also permitted. The current specific plan requires a minimum 50% of the floor area in a mixed-use project to be either commercial or industrial space, and then multifamily is allowed at the residential density of 12 dwelling units per acre as long as the 50% floor area requirement is met. Another aspect of this specific plan is the workforce and inclusionary housing requirements. The 2015 plan identified the 4-acre portion of land along Martis Drive to be essentially the primary workforce housing location for the workforce housing in the specific plan area. And it was intended that development of that parcel with 72 to 80 residential units combined with payment of some in lieu fees would capture the workforce housing needs of all future build out within the plan. The 2015 specific plan didn't require individual projects to construct workforce housing on site or comply with the town's inclusionary and workforce requirements. When the plan was updated in 2021, it specified that the workforce housing requirements and the in lieu fees that were in the tables in the plan only apply to projects that were approved or vested prior to adoption of the plan amendments, and future projects have to comply with the development code requirements for inclusionary and workforce housing. And that includes some additional requirements in the specific plan that the workforce housing units need to be provided on-site or at a comparable off-site location. So a developer can't pay in lieu fees or request an alternate equivalent proposal for their workforce requirements when it's within the plan area. There's also the policies in the plan that address the construction of the RMW parcel. One of those identifies, excuse me, that the 72-unit workforce housing project needs to have foundations installed before 40% of the plan area is built out. And then policy 8P8.7 prohibits issuance of building permits once a total of 139,828 square feet of floor area has been constructed, unless those foundations have been installed. To date, the amount of constructed square footage is 100,835 square feet between the Soaring Ranch Phase 1 and Truckee Tahoe lumber projects that have been constructed. The Soaring Ranch Phase 2 project is currently in the plan check process for their building permits. So you can see in the table there what the constructed and anticipated square footages would be for the build out. Next topic under specific plan consistency is the site design and architecture. The specific plan has some design standards and guidelines that address those project design elements in the M1 zoning district. One of the things that the Commission and Council talked about when the specific plan was amended was the mixed use requirements and whether there should be a mandate to do a certain type of mixed use and determine that horizontal mixed use where you locate the residential and industrial adjacent to each other was appropriate. So there's no requirement to do vertical mixed use. And as discussed in the staff report, after going through all of the policies and guidelines in the specific plan, we believe that the project's consistent with the standards, and we included some conditions of approval in the draft resolution to ensure consistency with all of those design standards. Development code consistency, we also included a number of conditions of approval to address consistency with the development code requirements. That included signage, workforce and inclusionary housing, parking, snow storage, bike parking, solid waste, landscaping, exterior lighting, private exterior space, open space and recreation amenities, and noise. In terms of infrastructure requirements, the specific plan has a range of on-site and off-site improvements that are required to be constructed as part of projects in the plan area. The engineering division reviewed all of those and determined that the requirements that apply to this project include construction of a Class 1 trail along the north side of Brockway Road, construction of frontage improvements along the Parcel 2 frontage, and construction of a transit shelter on Soaring Way, as well as a right turn overlap improvement at the Soaring Way Highway 267 intersection. So the draft resolution includes conditions related to those infrastructure requirements. We have a couple of edits from the engineering division after having some conversations with the applicant team after the staff report was published. The first one here, the language in blue would modify the language in condition of approval 61. And this is just clarifying that the Class 1 trail on the north side of Brockway has been bonded through an agreement with another property owner, and just clarifies that the trail section will be satisfied through that prior agreement. And then there's a requirement for a fair share portion of the common infrastructure costs. So Scott's here tonight to talk about any engineering questions. So if you have specific questions about this language, he can help with that. And then additionally, condition of approval 71 had a couple of additional edits related to the fair share portion of the Class 1 trail. As part of this project, we did a traffic impact analysis. LSC prepared that. They found that the net increase of approximately 306 daily one-way trips on the surrounding road network would occur, with approximately 41 occurring in the PM peak hour. And they looked at the implementation of the Parcel 2 project along with Soaring Ranch Phase 2, found that the intersection would operate at an acceptable level of service. But if you took all of those projects plus Soaring Ranch Phase 3, then the threshold would be exceeded by approximately 3 seconds per vehicle. So the westbound right turn overlap phase would be the way to address that and bring the level of service to an acceptable level. And they also found that no new turn lanes would be warranted on Soaring Way at the proposed intersection under existing or future full build out. So the implementation of the westbound right turn overlap phase is required as part of this project, and recommended conditions related to those requirements are included in the resolution. We've determined that the project doesn't require additional environmental review under the CEQA guidelines. Projects that are consistent with a community plan, general plan, or zoning. And then these additional CEQA sections essentially say that if a project is consistent with previously adopted environmental documents, then we don't have to do additional environmental review. So the town certified an EIR with the original plan adoption in 2015 and adopted an EIR addendum in June 2021. Those included a full range of environmental impact analyses and implementation of mitigation measures to address any impacts. Build out of the M1 zone was included in that, and we've determined that the proposed uses are consistent with the intensity and density of land uses that have been already analyzed, so no additional reviews required. Our recommendation tonight is to adopt Resolution 2022-14, finding the project exempt from further CEQA review and approving the development permit, tentative map, and zoning clearance based on the recommended findings and subject to the recommended conditions of approval. There's some alternative actions the commission could take. You could continue the hearing if you feel that additional information from staff or the applicant team was necessary. You could add, delete, or modify proposed conditions of approval, or you could deny the project if you find that the required findings can't be made. And then finally, you could require additional environmental review. If you take action on the project tonight, the appeal period would end at 5 p.m. on November 28th, 2022. And I'm happy to answer any questions. We also have the applicant team here. They don't have a presentation, but they're happy to answer any questions you have as well.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, who wants to start with clarifying questions for staff? Commissioner Riley?
Sure. Thanks. I have a few questions, kind of a variety. My first question is, why is there only one egress and ingress in this project?
I think probably the applicant team could speak to that. That was something that we talked about with Truckee Fire. They said that based on the scope of the project, a second access wasn't required for their purposes. But I think Martin could probably speak to why they chose not to have a second access.
Do you want to?
Let's stick with staff questions for now.
Well,
so,
I'll
yeah,
note.
yeah.
I'll note this as an applicant question, and to clarify. We are looking at the actual buildings. It's not like a just entitlement for uses. We would be approving the architecture that was presented. It's not just theoretical ideas. Is that correct?
Yeah. The shell buildings for the manufacturing uses, the individual uses will have to come in and get approvals once they identify which tenants are going to go in.
Okay.
But the buildings and the residential, all of that is
Okay.
being presented tonight.
Okay, I wasn't totally clear. And then I would appreciate clarification with regards to the RMW trigger. One of my main question is, because it all comes down to the built projects, the built square footage. And we're aware that because Soaring Ranch, all the phases of Soaring Ranch 1, 2, and 3 and Truckee Lumber were vested under the original specific plan, and that trigger was 181,000 square feet. They are held to or are they held to that standard? So would those projects be required to build the foundations at RMW when 181,000 are triggered, or are they exempt and we're only looking at this project as being responsible? I'm not totally clear on when that trigger occurs, who's responsible, and what that looks like.
Yeah, so when the trigger was originally put in the specific plan, it was that 181,000 number that you were talking about. So those projects are vested under the original plan because under state law, they submitted a housing preliminary application. So they were basically, we couldn't impose any new standards on them. And at the time, it was only based on non-residential floor area. So it's a different standard than what's in the current specific plan. When the commission and council revised the specific plan, you made it explicit that it includes both residential, non-residential, and that it's the lower number of 139,000. So theoretically, if a project, so as of now, there's about 100,000 square feet that have been built. So Soaring Ranch Phase 2, that's in the building permit process, if they move forward with construction and built out that whole phase before an additional project came forward, that threshold could be triggered. If they're still in the construction process and they haven't actually completed it, then another project could come forward and it wouldn't be constructed square footage that would trigger them to build the RMW.
So I'm looking at the chart, the Jurger Ranch anticipated build out 2022, and it does phase 2 and phase 3 of Soaring Ranch, because their square footage is, they have a combination of commercial and residential. Do we ignore the residential because that didn't pertain because they got vested under the original specific plan? And so because between phase 2 and phase 3, it's something in around 43,000 square feet. Well, it's added up 144. So that would not, they would never be responsible, or would they be responsible if they don't start construction and this project did its construction and within that got to 180,000? And so can you explain that, and is what I'm saying making sense?
Yeah.
kind of from a
Yeah.
timeline
So
standpoint?
yeah, you're right. We exclude the residential square footage for those projects that were previously approved. If theoretically this project were to move forward faster and get C of O before they got building permits, then, and it put it over the 181,000, which I suppose if you took the commercial, that I don't know off the top of my head if that would actually put it above. But then you also have parcel 4 on the other side of the road. So if there was a future project that came forward sooner and put it over the 181,000 of constructed square footage, then those projects would also be subject to the trigger.
So it's basically, whichever. Sorry, I turned my mic off. Whichever project constructs the amount of square footage that gets to, for the prior approved projects to 181,000 of non-residential, or from this point on, 139,000, which would pertain to this project, because they're the only ones that are vested under this plan.
And then parcel 4 when that comes
And,
forward.
okay,
So yeah, whoever comes in for building permits after that amount of square footage, whichever number we're looking at, has been constructed, would be subject to the trigger.
and it's the built, when the building permits are issued, is that
So the town attorney looked at the language in the specific plan and said that constructed would mean certificate of occupancy.
Okay, so actual built
Yeah.
structures.
Yeah. And that was a discussion that came up as part of this project review because the developer was interested in getting clarification could be triggered.
Right. So the sense is that this project would trigger, because of the square footage that they're planning to build, would trigger the RMW requirement.
If they wait to get building permits till after another phase of Soaring Ranch builds out. If they were to come in for building permits before Soaring Ranch builds out, then it would still only be 100,000 square feet of constructed square footage, so it wouldn't trigger it. So it all depends on the timing.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm wrapping my head around this. Thank you. Do either of you have questions related to this? I have other questions, but if we want to kind of keep on this
I think
thread.
we do. Dan, go ahead.
I'm going to ask a bunch of those same questions in a little bit different way. So let me be clear. So Soaring Ranch, both Phase 2 and Phase 3, 181,000 is their threshold?
Correct. They're vested
And
under
this
the original.
project and any future projects are 139?
Yes.
Now, this is actually, 40, they're asking for a tentative map. So this is actually 41 projects. Is that correct? Or 37, or however many lots they're doing. Everyone else will get a separate building permit?
It depends on how they build it out. They could build out all of the buildings and then subdivide after they've built the shell buildings.
Are we reviewing to approve a tentative map?
The tentative
today?
map, but when they record the parcel map, I suppose that could be a question if that's their plan to build the buildings and then do the subdivision or vice versa.
Okay. Because theoretically, if these guys start this, assuming they can start this project without having the trigger already started, the residential units are separate from the industrial, correct? Those are separate buildings with separate building permits?
Well, as of now, it's all one parcel, so I suppose if they wanted to come in and do a single building permit and build the whole thing at once, I suppose they could.
Because they would actually trigger,
I don't think you can do
I
that,
don't
though. I
think they
mean,
can do
you have
that.
different buildings, it's
Yeah.
different building permits, is it not?
it is, I think.
Well, like Soaring Ranch Phase 2 has 4 buildings, but it's one building permit.
I just am curious,
So-
they're building, whatever, 10 buildings, right? And every time they finish a building, they are now bumping up that threshold. So theoretically, their own project, they would hit that threshold midway through the project, which means the rest of the project could not be finished. Is that correct?
I suppose in theory, I think you might want to ask the applicant team what their plan for
We're gonna
construction
ask that
is.
next. I wonder if they thought about that. We'll get there. What is the status of Soaring Ranch Phase 2 specifically, more than it's just in the process?
It's Almost, they need one agency approval, and then there's a couple of corrections and a couple of fees that need to be paid, and then they should be ready to issue.
What agency are they waiting on?
The PUD.
PUD. So is that anticipated to be issued this year? Probably soon, it sounds like.
I think from the staff perspective, we'll be ready to issue. I'm not sure what the PUD's timeframe is and what infrastructure requirements they're still working through.
Okay. And then I had a question here. Let me pull this up specifically. I guess as I look in the specific plan on P8.6 and P8.7, where it says foundations, P8.6, foundations shall be installed for a minimum of, foundations for RMW 20 shall be installed prior to the 139,000 square feet. So that means theoretically, these guys could actually exceed that 139,000, build their entire project with nothing built, and then also Soaring Ranch Phase 2 and Phase 3, because they're 181,000, could then build both of those. And so there's a scenario where we directly go kind of against the specific plan, and all three projects are built, and RMW 20 is not built.
I'm guessing when the language was crafted that way, it wasn't anticipated that all of these projects were going to be trying to build at the same time. So yeah, there's probably some timing that wasn't really taken into consideration when that was written.
Sounds like the lawyers would have a field day with that.
Well, and it certainly wasn't envisioned that there'd be housing associated with phases 1, 2, or 3. And since then, state laws have changed drastically such that we're now, reviewing and approving housing projects rather than what I think we'd originally contemplated, which was a regional commercial shopping center. So, the plan is much older now at this point, and the state housing laws have changed substantially such that some of the plan, I would say, has somewhat been invalidated because of recent state law.
Okay. You're it.
Yeah, so Nikki, I feel like you got a little cut off there because we were talking about some specific questions, and then Dan wanted to jump in, and then he kind of ran with it. So do you have any more clarifying questions for staff that you want to finish up?
Sure, thanks. Yeah. I do have questions about LSC's recommendations. I'm not clear on what the language means on their recommendations. Is it possible that you could show us graphically, like what those, I think, turning descriptions are? Overlay, I don't remember what the wording is, but I can't picture what that means.
Yeah, we might be able to. Do you have Google Earth on here, Laura? Google Earth. So the improvement that they're describing is actually the exact same improvement that's currently functioning on the eastbound approach into the 267 Brockway intersection. So if you're coming down Brockway and you're trying to take a right onto 267 to go towards North Star, you have a dedicated right turn movement. And so it's called a right turn overlap phase, where you have a dedicated phase of the turning movement so that you're protected to take that right turn. When you're coming down Soaring, the original improvements for Soaring Phase 1 the right turn overlap on that movement wasn't warranted. So right there, you only have a green bulb instead of a green right turn bulb. So you're turning right at the same time when other movements may be occurring. So, Laura, can you do Street View if you're heading eastbound on Brockway? Yep, right there. And hopefully it has. Yeah, okay, so you can see, yep, and then just kind of pan to the right. Oop. Okay, so you see that there's a kind of a signal head there with 5 bulbs on it.
On
The biggest part on the right-hand side. So that's the right turn overlap phasing, where that provides a phase of the turning movements dedicated for the right turn movements, which is typically when the left turn movements are occurring on 267. So they're protected for that movement. It's the same thing that would be constructed on the other side, where currently there isn't that 5-bulb improvement.
I wasn't clear that it's a signalized turning as opposed to the fact that they have a protected left turn or right turn lane heading north. Is that-
So they already do. So if you look straight across the
Yeah.
intersection there, you can see there's a car turning in that right turn lane.
right.
There's just no dedicated right turn phase.
So the lighting would be the improvement?
Correct. Lighting and likely some signal timing improvements associated with the Caltrans encroachment permit.
Okay. But no, and they weren't specifying any improvements on Soaring Way in and out of, like a central, like a protected center lane or kind of like Donner Pass Road.
So like a two-way left turn lane.
Yeah.
So no, there wasn't a warrant for a left-hand turn pocket or a two-way left turn lane on Soaring just based on traffic volumes.
Okay. And then on that, it's kind of a deviation, but you're here. When will Soaring Way be repaved?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Okay. It's been pretty awful for a long time.
Got some pretty decent
Yeah, it's like,
transverse cracking in it.
okay, let's see if I had a question. Is there a plan to incentivize or lure West River Industrial to this location? Not you, Scott. Or I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts. I know you're, you're quite wise.
So I'm not sure if the applicant has thought about potential incentives for relocations. There are some things built into the plan, like the targeted uses that were really envisioned to try to encourage people to do that, but there's not a mandate in the plan for anyone to relocate. So they might have some thoughts on what types of businesses might be interested in these spaces.
Okay, I wasn't sure if maybe there was something behind the scenes, like, hey, we've been talking to so-and-so and they want to move Sizzy's or, the Stone Place or the, the propane. Let's see, I have another question. Was it contemplated to remove the housing and just do the industrial? Was that ever kind of put out by staff or?
Well, that's not allowed under this specific plan. They have to build on-site workforce housing. I mean, I suppose they could have proposed to build it somewhere else on a comparable site, but they chose to build it on-site.
Or to minimize the housing, like just do the required housing, but not make this, a larger percentage of housing?
Yeah, so there's the 8 workforce units that are required, and then there's the 4 market rate.
Yeah.
So I guess that could be a question for the applicant if they thought about just doing the workforce.
Yeah, okay. I guess I had come from the position during these deliberations some time ago as a commission before it went to council, because we're in such dire need of industrial, not wanting to dilute it with housing and really focus on the industrial, but, so I wasn't sure if that, was a conversation. Let's see, I think that's all I have.
Okay, I just have a couple of specifics about some of the design stuff. Can we take a look at the site plan? And some of these are actually going to be for the applicant. We don't have specific floor plans, is that correct?
There's floor plans in the packet.
I might have missed that. Okay, yeah, no, there we go. All right, so all of these industrial buildings, basically, these are going to be built together, right? Then there'll be kind of like a condo type of product where the property line will occur in the middle of the building.
I'm not sure whether they're planning to do it as airspace or have the actual footprint.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll clear that up in a second. And then going back to a comment you made a few minutes ago in regards to a building permit, were you saying that they could actually try to get all of these buildings constructed under one building permit? Is that what I understood?
I don't know if that's their plan. I mean, they are talking about phasing the project and doing the industrial and the workforce, for example, and then doing the rest of the housing later. So I don't think the plan is to try to build everything all under one building permit.
Whether or not that's the plan, but is it possible, is my question.
I mean, I can weigh in on other projects similar to this. I think it'd be up to the chief building official to determine how he would want to see that broken up. But there have been other projects. 10969 Industrial Way has a residential portion and 2 warehouse buildings, all under one building permit. So it's not uncommon for a development all on one parcel to have different pieces under one permit.
Okay, fair enough. And then this is just kind of a little particular question. I did notice that there was something about a design standard for clear glass, and that in these industrial buildings that the applicant is proposing to use tinted glass. Now, is that or walk me through that?
Sure. Yeah. So there's specific language in the plan that talks about having clear glass. The applicant team feels that because they're industrial buildings, that it would be more appropriate to not have the visibility into the spaces when you're walking along Soaring Way. So that's something that the commission can consider, whether you think it's appropriate to have that be tinted or not.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's all my questions for staff right now. I definitely have some things that we want to talk about, but yeah, go ahead.
I have one more for staff. when
Fire
we're
away.
done. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Kind of on the architectural design thread, one of the policies in the specific plan is not having blank unarticulated facades. And specifically, I mean, there's multiple, but the north side of the industrial building on the northern part of the property is about as unarticulated and blank, I think, as I've ever seen proposed in town, perhaps post incorporation. Why didn't the town weigh in? I don't think I read anything about that in the staff report.
So I think you're talking about the side of the building that faces the airport hangars.
Yes.
So originally that was all one material and color. We did raise that as not being consistent with the plan, and so they're proposing to have a difference between the upper and lower colors and materials on that building to provide a little bit of variation.
Did you provide, can we see a graphic? I don't
I'm
think
not sure if
saw that. I think whatever I saw was pretty much just a flat, did you?
It might just be in the staff report.
Yeah, oh, so that's like a break in material? or-
Exterior north elevation.
Okay, oh, metal
Metal
11, metal 10.
So if that's something that you feel isn't adequate to address that specific plan language, then you could talk about additional options to provide more articulation on that side.
Metal 10 and 11. Okay, thank you. That's all, Dave.
Okay, why don't you just roll right into your clarifying questions for the applicant then, and Martin, if you want to step up to the podium, we'll start chipping away at these questions.
Great. Thank you, Commissioners. Martin Wood, Principal SCO Planning and Engineering. I'm here tonight with the applicant, Rick Hauser, and also the project architect, Pete Rosato. And I want to thank staff, first of all, for the staff report. We're in full agreement with the conditions and mitigations as proposed. We put a lot of effort into trying to meet all the requirements of the specific plan. Let me go specifically through some of these questions that I kind of wrote down. First of all, just to this seems to be an overarching question, I think, for all of you. The phasing or the construction of this particular project makes a lot of sense to do most of the infrastructure and the shell buildings for all the industrial in one single phase. It doesn't make sense from a constructability to piecemeal it. And then the workforce housing that was added into the plan in June of 2011 by this commission and the council, those 8 units would be constructed at the same time as well. So right now the plan is, if you were to approve this project, that we would design essentially the whole project and construct at a minimum all the shells of the industrial buildings, all the main infrastructure, the parking, trash enclosures, et cetera, as well as the 8 workforce housing units as required per the development code. The second element of that, you never know what the economy is going to do. We try to build in some flexibility for the client. We did ask for separate phases for possibly doing the 4 market rate at a separate time, just to have some flexibility there. But we may make a decision, or the owner will, to build that all at once. So that is a possibility. One thing that kind of goes to the letter that was, I think, presented to you from MAP, as well as I think one of your questions, Nikki, or Commissioner Riley. The idea of this is we're asking, not all of these units are necessarily going to be that size in the project. We're asking for the total number, maximum number of units, But the way a project like this would normally work, and I think is what the intent of the plan is as it develops and they start courting prospective tenants or buyers, somebody may want 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, whatever is going to coincide with the square footage and the targeted use or the allowed uses that were identified in the specific plan. That was the whole idea behind the specific plan originally, was that BAE economic study that kind of really looked at some of those uses around the town that are maybe underserved or you guys want to move off of the downtown river corridor. And those are still allowed in there. As far as whether we're courting or trying to incentivize some of those particular clients right now, that isn't known at this time. But really, the owner thinks it's a great project. Truckee's great. It's a good specific plan. And we think with a project like this, if you build it, they will come, essentially. So that's some of the idea behind the phasing and the project itself, and the phasing. As far as the tentative map, what we are proposing on all these units for the industrial units, we think it's probably most effective to do a 0 lot line on the dividing walls. And that's why we asked for more than one phase on a final map, because they may build the shell, and as they're occupying 1 or 2 buildings, you don't know if that tenant in the 3rd building is going to want more space or where those lines need to be. And that flexibility for multiple phases in a final parcel map would allow that, and that nimble ability to adjust those lines to meet the end user. So that's the idea behind that. We are proposing, we've got the options per the development code on the workforce housing to do either for rent or for sale. If we do for sale, that would have to be condominiumized in airspace because the units are stacked. So that's the idea behind the tentative map and the idea of the construction of the site. Just a general overview. This site, similar to Rayleigh's, requires some fill that we place in there to make the drainage work appropriately. Right now, the drainage off of Soaring Way goes through a couple of inlets, and basically it's an open back inlet or a scupper that just kind of drains onto the property. So we're essentially treating that water per town codes for both water quality and for the different storm durations. The same drainage patterns are happening. Drainage is kind of going to the northwesterly corner and drains out as it always has. It's a very flat site, so we have to add the fill to make that happen, and also make that connectivity between the sidewalk along Soaring Way. Some of the other, I think, questions on here. Let's see, LSC's recommendation. Was that one of the questions?
I had a question about the one ingress and one egress.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, perfect. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
From the very beginning, the first thing you look at on a site like this is how are you going to effectively serve it for access. So one of the things we talked to the town staff at the beginning, and one of the things that was pretty much determined early on is we had to line up our driveway entrance with the phase 3 that you guys approved for Soaring Ranch. So that's our primary entrance, aligning with that point. We looked at the potential of adding an additional ingress egress closer to the roundabout at the other end. And that is problematic. It's not good to have in such close proximity to the roundabout tapers. And I also know that was a concern about the proximity of where the transit stop and those type of things are. So we meet all the requirements of dead end road length. Fire department was cool with it. We do have a wider, it is an industrial use. We slightly went wider on our access aisle. We're at 26 feet instead of the normal 24. We feel that's appropriate for the type of businesses, vehicles, and those type of things in here. We're well parked, but not over parked. We have the delivery spaces that are slightly larger for UPS, FedEx, all that type of stuff. We think it's well thought out. And to your question, I think, Commissioner Riley, I think you talked about, did we look at having more housing, less housing, or just, we knew at the get-go, per the change that, the town made, that we had to do the 8 workforce housing. And when we laid that in, it essentially, and to this point, because we think the industrial stuff is really important for the town, right? I mean, an industrial space in every community, it's the employment generator. It's important. We have that maxed out. We're at the 50-something thousand square feet that we're allowed. And then once you laid out the site, and with the site being pretty efficient, there was a lot of leftover space that just kind of felt like it needed some more. So we put in the 4 market rate. As you know, affordable units and workforce housing typically lose money for the developer, and the market rate was that nice balance of creating kind of a commingled residential pod and hopefully offset the costs and make it more viable. So that was the thought process behind that. We thought it laid out really well. In terms of the glass, we did get that comment from staff about the different glazing options and those type of things along the street. Originally, they wanted clear glass. Our thought on that was, if you got an HVAC, repairman shop, and he's got sheet metal in there and racks, do we really want see-through glass on that, or is it more appropriate to have tinted glass or some type of obscured? But I think we're open to that. We just want the end of the day for it to be, and you can tell from the architecture, a lot of effort into the view shed along Soaring Way and from public views. Those were highlighted in some of the elements of the specific plan itself. Speaking to the north elevation on the airport side, in all honesty, when we first did it, I thought it was a total waste of money. We're facing the hangars on the airport side that really have one material, green ribbed siding on the airport hangars. So, but staff did bring it up. We wanted to be 100% in compliance with what the specific plan said as far as articulation and change of materials. We talked to Pete Rosato about that, and he integrated some different metal features on there and some different colors. So we are providing some variation, not a ton, but we did make an effort on that point because we were made aware of that as well. Let's see. Those are the main items that I kind of wrote down on that, but we're happy to answer any questions. If you want to get into any specifics of architecture, we have Mr. Rosato here as well. So,
Commissioner Riley?
Yeah, I'll ask you, Martin, since you're up there, and you can defer to the architect if you'd like. But I'm concerned with the amount of roofs that seem to shed their snow in the pedestrian way, both along Soaring. I think some of the residential, the garages shedding, and my concern is that this is not snow country architecture. This is architecture you would find in, the valley, Stockton, not where we're, experiencing, the snow load and the safety issues, and having the shedding. And I am aware that the specific plan says there's no snow cleats allowed on the roof. So I'm just questioning kind of the design and intent of what I'm seeing.
I probably will defer to Pete Rosato on some of that, but we did have many conversations at the beginning through the design process on that. I will say one of the main intents of this is a lot of the snow is supposed to stay on the roofs, not necessarily and it has a parapet. I don't know if you want to describe specifically which buildings, Pete, but we can go into that in greater detail.
Okay, that'd be good. It looks like the majority of roofs are metal, standing seam, at least from what I'm looking at in the graphic here.
We'll describe them more specifically. We did go over that, some of those.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, that's definitely something that I've raised in my notes as a concern. And, yep, I think that's all at this point.
Okay. Did you want to talk about some of the snow shed options?
Yeah. Good evening, Commissioners. Peter Rosato, architect with LDA Partners. Regarding the residential units, to answer your question, Commissioner Riley, we have gable roofs over the residential units. The roofs will be standing seam, metal standing seam. We'll have a heated wire in the gutters and downspouts, and the snow cleats to keep snow on the roof to protect pedestrians underneath.
I believe the specific plan says no snow cleats.
It's just under the general commercial zone, not the manufacturing zone.
Oh, okay. And then maybe we could look at a picture of the residential. I had looked at that earlier, and it looked like there was, that upper left picture was what I was struck by. Two roofs that downslope in front of the garage.
Right, so you could see here, we are showing there's a horizontal line over the roof of the garage, so that's going to be our snow guard over the roof.
Okay.
Again, a gutter in front with heating element.
Okay. Is that upper roof intended to shed on the lower roof and kind of
No,
accumulate?
the upper roof, so all the roofs will have the snow guards.
Uh-huh. And a gutter and
That's
heat
correct.
tape? Yeah, okay. I appreciate the update. Thank you.
And so are those metal roofs, did you say that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Riley, any other questions?
Not at this point, thanks.
I have a question about the industrial buildings, and you'll probably be able to answer this. Is the thought process that those are going to be timber framed or steel?
We're looking at steel frame.
Okay, so potentially you'd have some flexibility if somebody wanted to come in and take a bigger space, you'd be able to open up some of those demising walls and,
That's correct.
yeah, okay. Commissioner Freeman, do you have any questions?
I was curious, does the applicant own the property?
I'll let,
Under contract purchase. And have you identified any tenants or potential tenants or use types? We have not yet.
Just ask if you're going to speak to go to the mic so that people at home can hear you.
And I was curious what you guys are going to charge for rental rates.
We don't have that planned out yet. We're waiting to get through Planning Commission and getting all of our plans set in stone before we went to market.
Yeah, makes sense. That was the only questions I had for applicant.
Okay, any other clarifying questions for the applicant at this point, or? All right, yeah, I think I'm good to go for right now, so we will go ahead and move into public comment for this agenda item. If anybody would like to make a public comment, please come on to the podium and state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak about anything you want on this project. Okay, seeing none, we will close public comment, and we'll move into commission deliberation. Who wants to start?
I don't mind starting. Go ahead. I think this is a nice project, but I just feel like we're in a situation here where we are likely going to see this built and then Soaring Ranch Phase 2 and 3 and not get RMW 20. And that seems like contrary to the specific plan.
It certainly feels that way, doesn't it?
And whether I like this project or not, it feels like our job is really to uphold the specific plan.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like that's not what's happening.
Well, my sense, and I could be wrong because I'm having, it's hard to wrap my head around the back and forth and the triggers and such. My sense is that this project would in and of itself trigger that requirement. And so then they would be beholden to do the RMW because they are set at the 139,000 industrial residential, whereas the Soaring Ranch 2 and 3, well, Truckee Lumber Phase 1 are 181,000 of only non-residential.
I guess actually a quick question for staff. So the trigger you said is completed buildings, correct? Not issued.
Certificate of occupancy is what she said.
Constructed square footage, so yeah, C of O.
So that means theoretically, this project could be issued a building permit concurrently with both Phase 2 and Phase 3. Phase 2 and Phase 3, if this project got finished first, got a C of O first, and then Phase 2 and Phase 3 finished, then all three projects could get C of O without RMW 20 being built?
Right, because of the way that policy is written, based on constructed square footage, not entitled.
But even if these guys got a building permit and then Phase 2 was built and C of O, before they got a C of O, then they could not get a C of O, but they could finish building it?
Because it's building permits, right? So it's not,
Well, I just wonder, like, now phase two is done. We is constructed buildings. We are over the 139,000 square feet threshold. These guys are halfway through their project, and you're going to say, well, you can finish it, but you can't get a C of O.
The policy in the specific plan says you can't issue building permits once that threshold has been met. So if they get their permits issued, they could complete their construction.
So under that rationale, it seems highly unlikely. It seems like these guys would be able to they clearly know what they're doing. It seems like they'd be able to get their building permit issued here in no time, in the next 6 months.
certainly before phase 2 is
12 months,
complete.
certainly before phase 2 is probably even started, let alone complete.
Right.
And so it just seems highly unlikely that there's any way we would actually get RMW 20 built. It's not only not likely, it's not only unlikely, it's not likely that would happen. Is that right?
I mean, if they were to move quickly, that would be the case. If they wait until the other project is constructed, then they would be subject to the trigger.
Seems like they've moved pretty quickly already.
I mean, I think what you're noticing is, discussions that we've had in the last, I would say, year and a half regarding the trigger and flaws that we have found in that language, plus the changes to state law that we've seen that were certainly never contemplated back in 2015. So I think last summer, was it when the council discussed coming back with a discussion on the trigger and what we want to do with it, recognizing some of the difficulties that we're finding with it with the new state laws. So no question, this has been a topic of discussion for about 2 years at this point, right?
And these guys are actually building some housing, though, which is nice to see.
Right.
But if we make an amendment to the trigger or the specific plan, it doesn't actually impact any of these 3 projects that we're talking about, because they're already all kind of water under the bridge grandfathered in. Is that correct?
So if this project were approved under the current specific plan, and then if the plan were to be amended to say, remove the trigger if the council decides that that is the right answer, then I suppose this project could ask for a project amendment to revisit that, getting that condition out of their approval at that point.
Yeah. Well, really, you got to ask Dave.
Yeah. Answer's still yes, but yeah, thanks, Commissioner Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Just one clarifier. Maybe this helps a little bit in context. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but this might help. And you probably know some of the parcel 4, which includes the RM20, is making progress moving forward. So one thing I think is important, aside from what we're proposing tonight, this project is its project on its merits. But parcel 4 has made significant strides in the last year or two in becoming on board. It's similar to Rayleigh's, and it's a lot about the infrastructure. So we've worked with staff on doing the 30% design drawings for the roundabout at Martis Drive and Brockway Road. We've gone, back and forth on that and kind of fine-tuned that. We've revised the tentative map that was submitted, I think, 3+ years ago on parcel 4, and working with staff to move that forward, all with the intent of wanting to bring that RM20 forward. So it's not, I just wanted to make the point, it's not dormant. It's not being pushed to the side. I think it is actively kind of moving forward, but this is and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just, this overall project between Rayleigh's and what Soren is doing in phase 2 and 3, and the other roundabout on the other side, we're talking 2 roundabouts, improvements at 267, almost a mile of class 1 bike trail. There's significant infrastructure, and we've been working on these in different components or different pieces, but I just want to assure you that the RM20 is making strides forward. So anyways, for what it's worth, that's.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Riley, what's your position on this project?
I appreciate, to echo what Commissioner Freeman said, they're building the housing, they aren't trying to get out of these requirements. I really appreciate that. I'm really hung up on the architecture, the design, the compatibility. I recognize, it is adjacent to the airport, the hangars, that is in and of itself, representative of its use. That also is a different, jurisdiction and done at a different time. I also look at kind of the surrounding buildings, specifically looking at Rayleigh's. I think is really high quality. It's really high quality architecture. It's high quality design. I like how it meets the street, the existing architecture. Same with the lumberyard building. Granted, there's some wood storage. I don't think that that's incompatible, but their actual storeroom, I think, is done quite nicely. I feel like this architecture is really anywhere USA. It lacks appeal. There's a lot of unarticulated wall planes, 2-story unarticulated planes. I don't think that the snow cleats are going to really take care of the snow load entirely with the metal roof, because it's the sheer span of metal roofing that these buildings have. So that's my main concern really at this point, is setting a precedent for what I see as architecture that isn't really representative of Truckee and our mountain town. And I look at this as much more of what we would see kind of, I looked at the architect's website, the stuff in Stockton in the Valley, Davis, Sacramento, even some parts of Reno. Not Truckee architecture, not place-making buildings. I have, I think the proportions are poor. While, yes, I get the blank facade on the north face, it's like, well, we have policies against that. So why is that okay? I think they could do a better job. So that's really where I'm having trouble, is supporting what's being proposed from an architecture standpoint.
So would it be fair to say that you would, instead of supporting this project tonight, prefer to see it come back with some tweaks at a later date?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Freeman, how are you feeling about this project?
Well, again, I think it's a needed project for Truckee. I do not disagree with anything that Nikki is saying over here. There are only 3 of us here, so we kind of have to be unanimous. And so I would, support a unanimous decision, whatever that looks like. I'd like to see this project get a yes, but that might not be tonight.
Please step on up to the podium.
I agree with that too. I want to get to yes. I agree, it's much needed. I am a huge supporter of industrial. Honestly, that's part of my whole rather see this. I wish it could be 98% industrial, whatever.
We know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Yep.
Yep.
Based on your suggestions, and obviously with only 3 of you, my suggestion would be, if this is a possibility, if we're feeling like, okay, hey, we hit the mark, but we'd like to see some modifications to the architecture itself, can we come back for architecture, but can we get approval for the rest of it tonight, just to give our client some surety of the project going forward? And that would allow us to start on some of the site design and some of those elements concurrently while we're bringing back some revisions to the architecture for you to review.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you. And Mr.
Rosato. Just to add to that, is it possible to pull up a Google view of a street view of the Rayleigh Shopping Center? So the reason why I want us to take a look at that is our applicant was actually, I think, being I think very respectful to the neighborhood and actually liked the architecture of the Rayleigh Shopping Center. So I hear you, and I understand what you're saying, but this particular project took a lot of inspiration from that architecture across the street. Unfortunately, it's not shown here on our Google Maps. I do have pictures on my laptop, but
I frequent that location quite a bit. I checked it out on my way here as well. what I'm struck by from an architectural standpoint is, and I have a background in architecture, that's what my first degree is, and quite familiar with AutoCAD, and what I saw was just a mirroring of facades for much of the buildings. And it's hard to get behind that. Just like I said, kind of the flat facades, the unarticulated masses. I hear what you're
That's
saying
true,
about,
probably from
you know,
the parking lot side. I think that's a fair
Yeah.
observation. From Soaring Way, I think we did a pretty good job articulating that viewscape,
Yeah.
introducing those windows, the gables, even the covered seating area for a potential brewery or specialty eating area that could use that space.
and that was a concern of mine as well, was the fact that will the uses engage the street the same way that, you know, the others do? I don't know, should I not be, I don't know if we're supposed to be having this
No, this is deliberation. I mean, we're talking
Okay.
about this project, so, I
Okay.
mean, you have
I
specific
appreciate
concerns.
you coming up and
Yeah,
sharing your
I mean,
thoughts.
I'm dubious about metal roofs with a single snow fence too, you know, shedding into pedestrian areas. That to me is, you know, a concern.
Can I clarify that real quick? It looks like there was gables on the pedestrian areas. It was really just straight shed roofs onto in front of the garages is at least what it looks like. It looks like, I think the architect said that there's gables on the pedestrian areas.
Okay, got it.
Chair Gove?
Yes.
Just a bit about process. So we can't really bifurcate the approval.
Right.
So your options are a continuation with some very specific recommendations of what you'd like to see, or an approval with the modifications being reviewed by staff. But my sense is from the discussion that you've had is those changes are something that you would rather see than us see. So if you end up in sort of that direction, then typically we go back and ask the applicant, would you like a decision tonight, or are you okay to continue before you finalize that motion?
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
And you only need 2 votes to approve this evening. You don't need the unanimous 3. It's majority of those present.
Okay, thank you.
So we can't make a condition for them to bring this back to us for review?
You would basically continue it.
Got it.
Yeah.
But we couldn't give them approval on, call it the entitlement portion.
No, because it's all tied together. All the findings and everything are linked. So for us, it's one set of approvals.
Okay, so hypothetically, fellow commissioners, if we continued this and requested the applicant to make some changes for architecture and design, and then this project came back basically exactly the way it was, with those changes made, and by exactly the way it was, floor area ratios, mixes, you know, uses and things like that, and we had the full 4 panel up here, would we be able to reach consensus, do you think, 3 of us? And you see where I'm going with this?
Not totally.
I'm trying to give the applicant a little sense of security as to what our thought process is, the 3 of us that are here, so that if it was continued and our 4th commissioner were here, and even if she were in disagreement, that we would have a 3-to-1 vote. Does that make sense?
How long would this take for you guys to make some changes and get it back to us?
Kind of a loaded question there, right? So everyone's busy right now. End of year code change, our schedules are full. So this is something we'd have to take a real hard look at with our staff scheduling and talk with the applicant and figure out how we might need to articulate this facade, if that's what you're looking for. My concern is, even if we do articulate it, it might not be the satisfaction of the commission. So how do we develop that to a way that's going to satisfy the commissioners?
Yeah, that's a good question and a good point. I think that we could probably get to a place where we, as a commission, could feel that some changes were made in earnest, and that if there were some additional tweaks that we needed, that could be handled at the staff level, would be my thought.
Can we make conditions of approval that are specific that then could be handled at staff level?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the things that you've talked about already, like the roof shed with the metal roofs with cleats, the blank north wall, mirroring of facades, Will the uses engage the street? Those are things that you could come up with conditions for, and have those reviewed by staff, if you think you can get there. I mean, these seem like in prior discussions that you've had things that you could condition if you want to. We're not sure yet if we have a quorum for December Planning Commission, so we haven't gotten that far ahead, but we know we have at least one commissioner not here, so that could be, if you're looking for a project applicant.
Peter's got his hands full. He's not going to make December.
I just want to be honest about the timing, that December may not be real, which then we're talking January timeframe.
Well, I mean, I think in the interest of due process, it'd probably be best to try and see if we can figure out a way through it here and now then. One thing that, I'll add to the design conversation that we've talked about on other projects, I think that we need to add some language about metal siding so that we don't end up with a product like we have at the Spring Hill Suites and the Coburn Crossing, so that there's got to be some sort of definition in there about, a metal vertical siding is going to be of a substantial gauge so that it won't appear warped.
Agree. Yeah.
Do we want to try and brainstorm a half a dozen ideas that we could make as conditions of approval?
I'm not comfortable having it go back to staff. I feel like staff proposed this being approved as is, and so I don't really have the confidence that it's going to be where I feel confident. I'm looking at elevations in the staff report, the perspectives along Soaring Way, and I see multiple sloped shed roofs shedding onto the sidewalk, as well as the notion of just the spans of standing seam, just utilizing the cleats. Do I think it could be improved to a point that I would approve it? Yeah, absolutely. I don't think these are non-starters. I just feel like if this was acceptable to staff, I don't know that I have the confidence that would agree with that. So I'll just be totally transparent about it.
So, Nikki, you're a no on this.
I'm a no as proposed. Yeah.
Okay. And Dan, you're, hey, let's see if we can figure out and get through some conditions to let the staff handle it.
I just am aware of the complexities of trying to do a project like this, and all the nuances with this specific parcel, and to give the applicant some security so they can move forward with the landowners and all, the financing and all the other things. That all takes time. And we say no, this gets kicked down the road, something happens, everyone changes their mind, we never see it again. And then we don't get our industrial.
I have a question for the applicant. Have you guys gone non-refundable on this?
Gone non-refundable.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
yeah. Mr. Hauser, is it?
Yes. So we do have earnest money up. It's non-refundable, subject to approval tonight. But in even a worst-case scenario for us is we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in design
Sure.
and timing with staff and whatnot. And we're kind of at time's end for us to get this done, because we've been waiting for a long time to get in front of you, Commission. So we're looking for an approval tonight, and if not an approval, then a denial.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Thank you, sir. Yep, up to the microphone, please.
Danielle, I know you said we can't decouple this, but if Planning Commission, if I'm hearing correctly, if you'll give enough faith in staff, basically based on your recommendations, we'll do some revisions. And can we offer, which it happens all the time, is giving presentations to the Planning Commission. We'll come back to the Planning Commission prior to staff finalizing this and give a presentation of the project moving forward. I mean, we can do a 3-minute PowerPoint with the elevations and get your guys' feedback before staff signs off.
How do you feel about that, Nikki?
Is that something that has been done before? I can't remember ever doing that.
I mean, somewhat. It just becomes a bit precarious if you decide that what they've presented isn't what you are thinking. So then what happens in that scenario?
Right. Do they go back to the drawing board and then come back again for a presentation? I mean, I
the
get
other part of it is that as the director, I have about a 10% change threshold that I can review that's outside of the Planning Commission's scope. So oftentimes we'll have some level of value engineering that happens when projects come in. And it's things like, they implement the building code and we realize that the mechanical room's in a different spot or things like that where, we just have to work it through with the building permits. So there are always changes that happen between when a project is reviewed by you and then when it comes back. So, I mean, yes, we could do a presentation, but again, I just sort of wonder what happens if it's not totally what you were thinking.
I think the key to success in this scenario would be giving us very clear direction on what the three of you are looking for in terms of architectural changes or otherwise. And then we will take very good notes and work with the applicant team when they're ready to come back to make those changes. But that obviously means you would, trust us to some degree to implement your vision that you would dictate to us.
Right. And recent projects where we've done this has been Andrew Cross's project downtown. So that came in with some very different architecture and then some conditions that got applied. So Yumi's been working with them to make modifications, even though they submitted it with their building permit, to make sure that it was consistent with the conditions of approval. Laura and I worked through Soaring Ranch on changes for that, making sure that it was consistent. And we spent quite a bit of time sitting in meetings with the applicant to work on that. So we do this quite a bit to kind of resolve those conditions and make sure that they're consistent. If we can come up with specific language, I think we could get there.
I mean, I admittedly had concerns with Soaring Ranch, and I was vocal about that, and there were limitations due to state law and housing law, and so I felt like my hands were tied in terms of holding the applicant to a higher or to a standard that I felt comfortable with. But I don't feel like we're in that instance here, and so I am, comfortable and confident, standing behind the points I'm making.
So Commissioner Riley, technically this is still a housing project. So even though it's mixed use,
The industrial is still,
because there is a residential component to it, all the same requirements apply.
except I think that we're still able to uphold the tenets of the specific plan,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
As well as, I would imagine, elements of public safety and compatibility. I mean, I don't think I'm out of my purview to say that the applicant shouldn't design roofs that shed into the pedestrian way, should design the buildings to really address the snow country that we live in, things like that.
The threshold becomes if it becomes expensive for them and they come back and say that we're finding now because of these changes that were added to the project, these conditions of approval that were added to the project, that it's no longer making the project financially feasible. And the threshold for that is very low. They don't have to produce a pro forma or anything like that for us to look at. It's really just a description of why it wouldn't make the project pencil. So there's a balance in there for us to walk between making sure we're consistent with state law, making sure these projects are consistent with the specific plan. So yes, if it's an objective design standard, very easy for us to say that's a requirement.
Yeah.
So I think the north side of the buildings, that one was very clear for us to be able to go back and say, let's work on that so that it's consistent with the project. But I just want to caution that it's still a housing project.
Sure. And I would say my position ties to public health and safety. I think that would be upheld.
Okay, so Commissioner Riley, can you give us just some succinct bullet points on what your concerns are so staff can note it?
I feel like I have. Do you want me to
Staff,
repeat that?
do you feel like you have a comprehensive list of what her concerns are?
So I'll start, and you guys can fill in if I'm missing stuff. So the north wall, making sure that there's additional articulation consistent with the specific plan. The roof snow shed, so something other than the snow cleats. Mirroring of facades on the parking lot side primarily. a response to if the uses will engage the street, because that's a question about the glazing.
Yes.
And then the metal siding using substantial gauge so that it doesn't appear warped. And then also just the large spans of standing seam, since that seems to be maybe not as durable or the aesthetic that would be consistent with the specific plan.
Okay, you feel like that's it?
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Freeman, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm curious about the white garage doors
Oh, yeah.
on the interior, if maybe a color there would just help have a little less contrast.
We actually have a condition related to colors that's in your resolution tonight for your consideration. That we agree. We don't think the colors are quite there.
Would either one of my fellow commissioners like to make a,
Wait, so you're going to hold their feet to the fire?
Yes. We already included language to change some of the colors.
do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion if somebody would help me and pull where I can find it here. I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2022-14, determine the project consistent with the adopted Joga Ranch specific plan and thereby precluding any further environmental review consistent with CEQA, Section 15183, and Public Resource Code, Section 21166, and CEQA Guidelines, Section 15162, and approving development permit, tentative map, zoning clearances, based on the recommended findings and subject to the recommended conditions of approval that we just listed, including roofs not shedding into walkways, incorporating snow country design, changing the color of the garage doors, more articulation on the north side of the building, reduce mirroring facades. Did I miss one?
Metal siding.
Metal siding of substantial gauge, and maybe smaller panels so they don't have as much oil canning.
I'll second.
Okay. Commissioner Riley?
No.
Commissioner Freeman?
Yes.
Chair Gove?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries on a 2-1 vote.
Thank you very much for your bringing your application forward, and good luck with your project. Okay, we will move into item number 8, staff reports. Do we have any staff reports tonight?
We have no staff reports this evening, but we do have a couple information items.
Take
Or
it
really-
away, Jenna.
Really just one. So next month, as we noted earlier, we are having a planning commission meeting. That'll be on the 20th of December. We are reaching out to understand if we have a quorum. It's kind of unclear at this point, but we will certainly follow up on that. We'll have 2 items, one that got continued this evening. That's the Tykert Quarry Annual Report. That'll be back in December. And then we have, we were calling it Golden Valley. I believe it's now called River Sage Charter School application that will be before you in December.
And some meeting minutes.
And some meeting minutes. Well, that's always before you, but yes. That's all we've got for that agenda.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jenna. Do I hear any commission member reports?
I just wanted to share an info item that I thought was really interesting, and staff may have heard this. You all both may have read this, but Fodor's travel site, I don't know if you're aware, posted that there were 2 locations that really needed to stop inviting people to visit and actually like put the brakes on, similar to places like Venice. And I know French Polynesia has implemented some rules to not have more visitors than there are people who live on the islands. But I thought it was interesting that they noted that Lake Tahoe was one of 2 places that are in dire need of a relief on a multitude of things, not just environmental, but the social impacts as well to housing and whatnot. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that even this huge, tourism entity that thrives on making money off of telling people where to go is,
Saying pump the brakes.
calling it like it is.
Yeah.
So I wanted to put that out, especially in light of our upcoming general plan work and decisions.
All right. Commissioner Freeman, anything to report?
Winter is here.
Winter is here. All right. And with that, we will adjourn to the next meeting of the Planning Commission on December 20th, 2022, 5 p.m. here at 10183 Truckee Airport Road, Truckee, California.